Good morning, everybody. Good morning. I am changing. And the thing is, I'm changing from what I am not into what I am. That's what we're doing by studying this stuff, by seeking to apply this stuff. We're changing from what we are not. I'd like to believe we've had enough of what we are not. Would you like to believe you have experienced enough of what you are not?
Yes.
There we go. Now let me ask you, we're reading a series here. Anybody? Has anybody bothered to read this book? Who else reading the book? 1, 2, 3, 4. We got 4, 5. We're up to 5 people now. Last week it was 3. And then last week I also asked, how many people here have some issues with their prosperity? Last week all these hands went up. This week nobody wants to admit to it. Prosperity's 10 Commandments. I'm so enjoying this. We're getting a little feedback up here, Christina. Little ring. Thank you. These 10 Commandments are really wonderful. I can't recommend highly enough that you buy this book and read it. Buying it is insufficient. Reading it and applying it makes all the difference. I've got many books I've never read. They don't help me. Having them on my bookshelves do not help me. Reading them and applying them, seeing where I could agree or where I might one day agree. This week's, the first week's commandment sums it all up, just as in the 10 Commandments. The first one sums all 10 up. Thou shalt look to no other source but God for my good. That's where my good is always going to be. My good is never going to be in the world. The world may reflect my good, but my good is not actually in the world. My good is in me, and God lives within me. And so, to look into the world, to look into my wallet, to look into my bank account, to look into your bank account for my good is insufficient. All that's going to do is reflect my thoughts, my beliefs. Now this week's commandment, thou shalt not take thy wealth out of circulation, which goes with the original commandment, thou shalt not kill. Thou shalt not hoard. Thou shalt not hide thy wealth. Thou shalt not be afraid of thy wealth, is what it really comes down to. Thou shalt not kill. How about that? Thou shalt not take thy wealth out of circulation. And so, to pretend that I am poor, no matter how much money I have, is taking my wealth out of circulation. To talk about being poor is to kill. It's to kill my wealth. Now, it doesn't mean that I have more cash on hand than I have. It just means I do not need to pretend that the amount of cash I have is what truly represents my wealth. That's what we need to be aware of. I do not need to pretend that whatever condition my body is in right now is an exact representation of my health. These are called conditions. But positive or negative, they're still just conditions. God is the source. And I don't believe that I've heard that God could be sick or poor. Last I heard, God was not in the unforgiving business. But neither is God in the forgiving business. Because you see, God is not in the judging business. God is not deciding what is and what isn't. I'm in the deciding business. Oh, I have lots of decisions I've made about what's going on in front of me. Have you decided over and over again what's going on in front of you? Whether you like it or whether you don't like it. The nice part is, God couldn't care less what I like and what I don't like. God doesn't care. God is not in the caring business as far as a personality goes. Oh, I care about you. You've said nice things. You've done some nice things. So let me give you a little something. God doesn't do that. God has given us everything. absolutely everything. Remember a few years ago, I've talked about this before, someone here was having, she's no longer with us on this planet, but she was having car issues. She no longer had a car. And I found it amazing to me that we are surrounded on 3 sides by brand new cars, and we have car issues. There's a bank on every street corner, and we have money issues. I find that fascinating, but I know why we have these issues. And Jesus really summed it up beautifully in the parable of the talents. And I'm going to shorten the parable of the talents today, down to two servants rather than 3. This master, this wealthy individual, was going on a trip back in the olden times, and he left 2 servants in charge. And he gave the first servant 5 talents. Now back then that was about $5,000. And but he gave him these talents and said, do with them what you will. And he gave the other servant, who he thought he could handle this 1 talent, to do with what he would do. Well, that first servant, he went and invested his talent, and he doubled it. The second servant, he went out back and dug a hole, put the talent in there so he wouldn't lose it. Well, the master comes back and he said, so what happened? Well, the first servant comes to him and says, look what I did. I invested my talent. I used this talent and I doubled it. And the second servant says, I'll be right back. And he runs outside and digs up his talent where he's been hiding it for fear of losing it. And he brings it back and he says, look, I didn't lose it. And the master is furious at him, as the Bible tells us, and he takes it away from him. And he says, you foolish person, let me give this to this guy who knows what to do with his talent. And the lesson in the Bible says, for those who have, more will be given. And for those who have not, even what they have will be taken away. And for the longest time, I never understood that. You know, well, how can, if you don't have, how can that be taken away? But now I understand. We all start with a divine mind. And if we don't use that divine mind, it will wither. It's like you get a good idea. You get a great idea. Well, a great idea is not going to go unmanifested. And so if I don't use my great idea, I guarantee you that great idea is going to spring up somewhere. Somebody else is going to have that great idea, be it for a great restaurant, be it a great whatever. So that great idea is not going to go to waste. Are you prepared to use your talent? Or are you going to kill it? Are you going to kill your talents through fear, through negative conversation, through words like I can't afford it, through words like I don't know how, through all that stuff? I've used all those words out of terror of what I might have to show up for, out of I might fail, out of I don't know what will happen if I get on the path. But then I read things like this, and I listened to people like me, and I believed them. I believed people like me that said, it's possible. It's possible. You don't have to know how. If you become willing, you will attract the people who know how. You will draw many, of Course in Miracles goes on, mighty companions along your path to help you build your business, to help you build your career, to help you build your family, to help you build whatever, once you become willing. It's not about having to know how. I've said week after week after week here, in God, it is already figured out. But I must be a willing participant if it's going to be manifested through me, whatever that is. And so if when I wanted this job, I didn't know how to minister a church. And there have been a few who still say I don't know how. But I believe I do. And back then I believed it was possible. But I didn't have a clue how, and I was afraid. I was really afraid. How am I going to write a talk every week? How am I going to do a talk every week? How am I going to deal with the office? And how am I going to deal with people? And how am I... Well, I didn't know, but I knew God did. And I knew other ministers had done it. Other people who didn't know how at one point. Eric Butterworth wanted, he wanted to be a singer, in case you didn't know that. Eric Butterworth really wanted to be a singer. And he asked a mentor of his, if he thought he could make it as a singer. And the mentor said no. And so Eric became a minister because he had to be in front of the people. And he had to serve in some way. And he served beautifully. Now, I used to think, how am I ever going to do what he does? This man is an icon in front of these people. People buy his CDs, or the cassettes, after the service. How's that ever going to happen? Well, it's happened. Now, we haven't grown to 3,000 on a Sunday yet. Doesn't matter. We are mighty, no matter how many are here. We are truly mighty. Mighty, 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 because we are here to get a new idea, to instill confidence in ourselves that it is possible, that which I wish to experience, that which I know it is possible for me to do. I'm allowed to do what I love to do. That's what they told me. And I moved to New York to be a movie star. Because I thought being a movie star would make me safe. Okay, here's the first thing. I thought I was in danger. If you notice that. I thought being a movie star, I could have a house with a wall around it. And people would look and say, oh, I want to be that guy. Now, they wouldn't know me. I'd still be an illusion. I'd still be a fake. But at least they wouldn't see what a fake I am. And then I began to see, well, but I didn't want to study acting or anything like that. I just was hoping that some life would happen to me to make me safe. And my life began to crumble more and more, and I became more and more unsafe. And I began to falter. And I was ever more afraid. And then I quit drinking. What I did was I sought to get sober. And the funny part is, about 30 days into that sobriety thing, I truly committed to it. I said, I will try whatever you people tell me to do, meaning those 12-step people, and those people. And whatever you people tell me to do, and if it doesn't work, I'm not coming back. I got even more afraid. I was afraid to walk the 2 blocks home at night from work. I had to find friends, but I did. And I didn't say I was afraid. I just said, well, we'd go for coffee. I'll walk you home, Shawn. People would volunteer, Shawn. I didn't have to ask them. Just said, let me walk you home, Shawn. Because now there was the same people were in the streets that had been for years when I wasn't so afraid, but I was numb. But people showed up to walk the 2 blocks home. And we'd have a great conversation. And so you see, we have people for this. We have people for this living thing. There are people who want to help us and who don't even know they're helping us. Sometimes they just want our company. And so we keep growing when we become willing, because you see, it was more important to me to not numb myself. I was willing to be afraid. I knew it wouldn't last forever. And then, my confidence restored as I began to build a foundation of true wealth, of true abundance. I began to build a foundation of God around me, of faith in God. I would get on my knees several times a day and offer myself over to the care of God. God, I offer myself to thee to build with me, to do with me. Over and over again, I would do that. And I would get a greater understanding of what God really does instead of what God really doesn't do. Because I used to think God did things. That God handed me cash, and God did this and that and that. But it wasn't it. It's just as I became focused, because praying on my knees did not create a worship experience or a religious experience. What it did was I was focused. I knew my function when I was there, and it was to connect to God. That's what it did for me, praying on my knees. In Unity, nobody ever suggests praying on your knees. I say if you can't get focused praying, get on your knees. What's the difference? Sit in a chair. Find your sacred space that works best for you to pray. And so with this, I started having confidence in me. because I knew how to say yes, and I knew how to say no, and I knew how to say please, and I knew how to say thank you. I didn't, for a long time, didn't have much more conversation than that. But what happened was I just kept growing and growing and growing, and I began to use my talents instead of burying my talent, because there'll be nobody to help me. I started to use my talent. I started to say yes to my talent, and I kept reading books like these things. I started, I found Unity, and I started taking class after class after class, and I completed every single class. That was a new thing for me. I didn't finish many classes ever in my life, because then what was I going to do with them? But this was teaching me how to live in a way that I wouldn't hurt myself anymore. I didn't want to hurt myself anymore. No matter what anybody seemed to think of me, I knew I didn't have to hurt myself anymore. And I kept growing, and I kept saying yes, and oh, you can become a licensed Unity teacher? Fine, I don't know what that means, but fine, I'll do it. And I still did my lights at night, and I kept being of service, and being of service, and being of service. I knew my life was to be one of service. How can I help others? God, you tell me how to help this individual, and this individual, and this individual, because with each person that I helped myself. And I never once heard this has to be hard, this has to be drudgery. I just heard, grow, keep listening, keep listening, keep listening, let your talents come forth. And then one day I had the idea, I'm going to be a minister. Divine idea, I'm going to be a minister. Okay, some of you have heard this story before. I was teaching this class called, I can't remember what it was called now, something like Being All That You Can Be, or something like that, based on a Frederick Bales book, which we have in there. He was a religious science teacher. And I had a flip chart up there, and it started with idea. I had the idea, be a minister. I made a plan. The plan was, I'm going to ask the minister in the city to make me a minister. Action, I asked him to make me a minister in that church there. And then the fourth part is manifestation. Well, the problem came up in between action and manifestation. And we have a little subcategory called obstacle. He said no. I asked him, and he said no. Now, does that, what a lot of people will do, oh, I guess that means I'm not supposed to be a minister. But I knew that couldn't be true. What I realized is I was asking for crumbs. I went back up and I said, is the idea still good? And I heard yes. Now, is the plan still good? And I heard, no, your plan's too small, Shawn. That is way too small to go pretend you're a minister in this church for no money, and you'll just have a title, and it won't mean anything because he's still not going to want you to do anything. So I had to make my plan bigger. And my plan was, fine, I will go minister or pastor a church. But I have rules, God. I'm not going to leave David, so it has to be commutable. That was really the only rule. I wasn't going to leave David. Well, the next week, this church calls. Unity Fellowship Church. No, it was Unity Fellowship Church then. That was the name of the place then. And called and said, we're looking for a licensed teacher to be our minister. Well, now it's like, holy smokes, now what do I do? But you see, I had a support team. I had David. And what I used to do every week for the first probably year that I was here, I would write my talk, like a Thursday or Friday. Saturday, David would sit with a tablet. And I would do my talk for David. And he would give me notes about, this makes sense, this doesn't. I was willing to look small or stupid or whatever, because I knew he didn't think of me as small or stupid. He admired me for the fact that I was willing to get help, to be better. And then I would show up on Sunday with a whole talk. And we kept growing. And it wasn't just me, that's why I say we. The whole church kept growing. Because a lot of you witnessed me growing and willing and said, okay, I can take a risk. I can take a risk. I can take a risk. I didn't kill my talent. I didn't kill it off. I didn't hide it under a bushel. I was willing to fail to succeed. Craig Ferguson, late night talk show host, in his book, he says he has taught his son that we just fail until we succeed. That's all that it is. And so I don't have to be embarrassed if I fall. I don't have to be ashamed. I don't have to spend one more day in humiliation. It can just be, okay, this plan didn't work out, but is the idea still good? Is the idea still good to have all that I want, to experience all that I want to experience, to be all that I am? Are you serving in the way to be all that you are? Is your life serving you to be all that you are? Are you enlisting the consciousness of God into everything? Or are you still compartmentalized and the other stuff is, I got it from here, God? G-O-D. It's not a person who's deciding. It is good, orderly direction in every aspect of your life. Are you mission-driven in to do all that we here say we can do? It all sounds good on Sunday, but how's it feeling on Monday? And how's it feeling on Tuesday to you? And Wednesday, and Thursday, and Friday, and Saturday? Are you still revved up by Saturday from all the possibilities we talk about here on Sunday? If you need reminders during the week, then you go to like-minded individuals and you take those classes and you discuss stuff. You get a prayer partner to affirm your highest good, not to talk about what's wrong with your life. That's not a good prayer partner. Don't find the prayer partner who will enable your misery. And then affirm that God is all present. After you've talked about every miserable thing that's going on in your life, okay, and now let's affirm that God is one. You're crazy. Do not do that. You get a prayer partner that you get together with and you pray together. And prayer is affirming that you and God are one. That's what a real prayer is. God and I are one. God and I are one. The Christ in me is awake now. The Christ in you is awake now. If you want to manifest and demonstrate this astonishing life, be willing to sacrifice all of your misery. Be willing to sacrifice all of your lack, if you want it. And what you're probably going to notice is, well, I want it in some places. I want my abundance over here. But I'm still willing to settle for crumbs over here. I'm still willing to settle for crumbs in my relationship here, but I want the abundance in work. You know, I'm willing to be poor in consciousness, but I'd like a lot of cash. Settle for it all. Settle for the best. Settle for the good that you and God and I are. That's what you settle for. And it doesn't have to be hard work. And it doesn't have to be drudgery. But you may go through a period. It's called the wilderness, where you don't know who you are. And you don't know what you are. And your everything will be turned upside down. And when it is, that's when you really say, thank you, God, it must be working.
Yeah.
Thank you, God, I feel insane. It must be working. I haven't got a clue. Thank you, God, it must be working. I don't know anymore, but I'm free. I don't have the answers, but I'm free. Thou shalt not take thy wealth out of circulation, which means thou shalt be wealthy. Thou shalt be abundant. Thou shalt be what thou art. I say congratulations to each and every one of us here today. We're rich, 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 just as it ought to be.